Welcome, Yerushalmi, Bava Kama. We're up to the Daf Yates Amar Aleph. We'll start from the Elig Mishnah. Halacha Zayin. Zok the Elig Mishnah, Shor Isha, Shor Isam, Shor Petrapis, Shor Midbo, Shor Hegdish, Shor Hager, Shemeis, Veino Yarshin, Harelechi of Misa. All these Shvarim are Mechuyev Misa. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda says, Shor Midbo, Shor Hegdish, Shor Hager, Shemeis, Veino Yarshin, Peturim and Misa, Pnei Shein Lam Bailam. That's for the same reason that the Tanakhama says the Chayav Misa, because there's you don't have people who are responsible at the top. Rabbi Yehuda says the opposite. He says that therefore they're potter. So sagt the Gemara Shoy Shoy so in my time the Rabbi Yehuda, what's his reasoning? V'hud b'volov lo yishmerenu ein ba'alim le'elu. They don't have a baal since it says v'hud b'volov lo yishmerenu, so it's v'hud b'volov. But if there's no baal, how can it be muad b'volov? Fine. What about leaning Nizakin? What about damaging? This is if they kill, what if they damage? Tana Rishai leaning Nizakin, Rebmei Mechav Rebbeuten Paita. That Rebmei is Mechav, the Tanakam of our Mishnah is Mechav, and Yehuda Patas. What about Lekoifer Ma? What about Koifer? So the Marafulda says, we see the Marafulda Lekoifer Ma, Chayvoi Patel Reb Yehuda. Shouldn't the Marima Bavli is the Marafulda. Paita Hoy Reb Yehuda, Afilu ben Nogach Vachkach Hikdish, Nogach Vachkach Hifge. So the person, right, the Bavli, it's brought down, Reb Yehuda holds that even if it was Negech, and after the Negicha, the Baal went and he was Makdish it, or was Mafgir it, Nogach Vachkach Mesager, the Gerdar Lechem Yivorle, and Baal Chiyav Mekayf. What about, right, okay, so he's Pata, but what about Kaifer? Does Kaifer itself, does he have to pay Kaifer? So he Kaifer Kapara. So Rapidos B'Shem Rishai says a kol moed mekayfer shu chayiv. Everybody agrees that kaifer, since kaifer is a kapara, like we said, so therefore he's chayiv. This time Rabbi Yochanan Shem Riyanik Shem Shecholkim Nizokim Kachem Cholkim with kaifer. No, it's actually the same machlekes. Rabbi Yehuda, he's pata. The same way the Eina shows is that the show's not misa, so the Ba'am don't pay kaifer either. Rabbi Yehuda Kon Rabbi Zira Heichav Novda. So the question is. He's asking according to Rehuda, and the Marafulda brings down because in the Bavla we know that anytime it's Machleks or Meir Rehuda, Loch Zoik Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, the question is: do we hold that it's that he's chayiv, right? Do you hold like right? So do we hold like Rabbi Shaya that says he's chayiv? Do you hold like Rabbi Yochanan Shem Rihanna who says? That Rabbi Yehuda is part of Amalek Rabbi Shaya, Linin Izakin, that you be chayiv. I'm sorry, Amalek Rabbi Shaya. So he told him like Rabbi Shaya that he chayiv. Linin Izakin, Rabbi Mechav Rabbi Yehuda Paita. And what do you see? So once he brought a rifle in Zakin, so you see it says especially in Zakin, Rabbi Mechav Rabbi Paita. So Davka by Nizakin, Rabbi Yehuda says you part the whole kaifa. The very kol chayiv. Apparently, it seems that there's no machlokes by kaifa. So that's why we pass on like Rabbi Shaya. So the Mishnah lochaches shoshu yoytzel isakil l'sho. It's going after skila v'ktisha ba'olov, and so in other words, already had a gemar din, and they take him out to stone the show. V'ktisha ba'olov. He figures maybe he'll chap a rein here, he'll be makdish it. Maybe needed the tax write-off. Eine muktish. It's not muktish. From shachte psaros, and even if he shechts it, the basra is awesome. Imach lo nigmadina hiktish ba'alov, but I have lab where if he was makdish before the gmadin, muktish. Vim shachte, and if he shechted it before the gmadin, besoroi mutter. Then the basra is mutter. Zot gemor shor yotzel isok, tana shor yotzel isok, but him to aid of zayimim. What happens if you show it's going out for skill and turns out the Aiden that testified against the show turns out they're Zaymim. So Rabbi Yochanan Amakol Kodim Boy Zacha because the Baal gave up already. And Echanami was Betas, but he was Miyash and I figured that's it. There goes my show. If anybody chaps it, can keep it. Rish Lakish, used toast, so the whole thing was a mistake. Right? Because they didn't turn out to be Zayim. V'chein Evet, similarly, an Evet who had killed Hayotzel Harik, so now the Evet's going to be killed. Him to Eidav, Zayim. Turns out it's Eidim Zayim. Rabbi Yochanan is Zocha Atzmai. Because again, the Baal gave up on him, so he's Miyayish on him. So who's the first person that can be Zoich in an Evet? The Evet. So therefore, he's kind himself. Rishok Shaman, no, Yish Tos, so it's a mistake. Right. Halacha Tezuk Telig Mishnah. Master Shemachinu L'Shav Naisa Sachel Saich Nichnasu Tachas Ba'alim. So if he gives over the shar to any one of these Shaimrim, so then they take the place of the Baal. Yatzav Hizik Muad Mishal Nezik Shalom. So if he goes and damages, so the shar causes damage, so then if he's a Muad, he has to pay Nezik Shalom. But Tam Mishal Mechatzi Nezik. By the time, he only pays Chatzi Nezik, like the din of the Baalim. Kashru ba'alav b'maisira. If let's say the owners went and tied it with a rope, b'nal b'fan of karo, and he locked the door, b'yatzav v'hizik, zok the Mishnah chayiv. That is chayiv. So we're going to establish that um, this is the minimal, that this is a shmir pchusa, and therefore if he goes out and damages, he's chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda metam chayiv, and counterintuitively muat pata. Tam yibi chayv amud pata. Why? Shneim v'lo yishmer ba'olav, and shamur huze. By amud it says v'lo yishmer ba'olav at all. So Nashma says even if you had a small shmir, it's good enough to patim. Rabbi Eliezer ein lo shmir sakin. The only shmir for amud is the knife. Okay. Sagt die Gemara, Masel Shemechinam. Amr Blaza Devre Meye, Shmiras Nezakin Kishmir Shemechinam. That the Shmiras Nezakin, according to Remei Shita, is like the Shmira of a Shemechinam. And Devre Yudin Shmiras Nezakin is actually Ke Shmira Shemesacha, as din of a Shemesacha. So let's see the Maraful inside. It's a little lengthy. I'll go through it. Dibra me shmiras nezakin shmiras shemechin klema shmira pchusa kigan kasha ba'alav v'mesev and all das lefanov kara oy hainu shmira pchusa. That's the minimal amount you can do. Delo sheichol alam beruch matzuya, a door as long as it can withstand the regular wind. Kedisa ba'koinis v'isa bavli my time the remeya kasava, right, and he also potter kasava stam shvar and labaches kashima kayamin. They're not bechesk. In other words, I have to assume we're not watching them. Claim ain't other mishama shari klal el mlich v'yaitze. V'amrachmana tam nechayiv din aboilo shmir pchusa. So the Torah tells you, okay, you have to do some kind of shmir. Like we established, person by default doesn't watch a show at all. Torah tells you, tam, gotta watch him. So therefore, what does that mean? I got to do a minimal amount. Hodom Rachmana v'lo yishmerenu gabi muad. Then, but it says v'lo yishmerenu bala, which is going on muad, and bala yishmir mu'ula. Right? So by a muad, the Torah tells v'lo yishmerenu means you're taking it up a notch. Right? The tam is a shmir pchusa. The muad is already a level up, a shmir mu'ula. V'yalav gzei shav negicha l'tam negicha l'muad. The l'bala tam nari shmira mu'ula. And we have a gzei shav of negicha l'tam negicha l'muad. And now that Gezer Shava teaches us that you need a Shmir Mula. Actually, by both, you need, in other words, Tam also needs a Shmir Mula. A Shmir Pchusa is not enough. Laficha Cham Rabeya, Koshroi, right? Like in the Mishnah, the Hainu Shmira Pchusa, he does a minimal amount, V'yotza V'hizik, and it goes out and it causes damage. Bein Tam of Muad, Chayv. Therefore, in all those cases, you're Chayv. Rabbi Yehuda Sava Stam Shram Becheska Shima Kayam. Now, okay, so one second. So that's Rabbi Meir's Shita. So therefore, he holds. And we saw in the Mishnah, Taka v'yatzav v'hizik, right? So the kosher ba'olav b'masira, v'nal b'fanav karozuk, the Mishnah v'yatzav v'hizik, chayv. That's Rabbi Meir Shita, yichayv. However, Rabbi Yehuda holds differently. Rabbi Yehuda holds sava stam shvar b'cheskas shima kayama. A stam shvar is b'cheskas shama, so that it is being watched. V'hainu shmira pchusa, right? Because stam, by default, everybody does a minimal amount of shmira, Zok Rabbi Yehuda. V'hainu shmira pchusa, shomer moisna bailam, like we said. V'amar Rachmana, tam chayiv. Yet the Torah tells you, knowing that The average person is guarding his shor, at least a shmir pchusa, gotta watch his shor, even a tam. So the neboile shmir mula. So why is the Torah telling you this? By time it's telling you that you need a shmir mula. Now the Torah repeats again by muad loishmenu. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you're already watching Yishar, the time already requires a shmir mula. What are they being mad? Bezicha muad would need a shmir mula, right? Because you have more machman than a tam, right? So hadam rachmona gabim loishmenu the boile now shmir mula. So what is this? Havale ribach. Riba is famous. Klav ribach. Riba vein ribach riba elamait. It must be country might. Muad mishmir mula. It's country might. A muad from mishmir mula. Very counterintuitive. L'chein Rabbi Yehuda tam chayiv. That's why it says a tam is chayiv. The bar shmir mula. The Mishnah we saw. Aval muad. The shamu is the sagile b'shmir pchusa. Right, avomua the shamahu zeh the sagile b'shmir prusas. Even a minimal amount is good enough, and therefore you put the at kan humi bavli. Fine, this is all from the bavli. V'chan emes lo shas kan. This is what the Yerushalmi holds. L'chein amal l'divrei meir shmiras nizakin shechiyav atoy lishma min nizakin kishmiras shemechina, like we saw. Ma shemechina im shamar oiso shmir prusa kol slo shmir oso shenechav yosem izeh. He did the best he could. He did a shmir prusa, right? Hachanami shmiras nezakin. The same thing applies to shmiras nezak. Shrei betam am rachmana dechayev geechel de boile shmir pchusa. So shmami no min astam shmiras nezakin kishmiras shemechinam ela shehech mir olav hakosav lias kimuad the neboy nami shmir muula lenin yatzav hizik shiu abalim chayavim. Right. So that's why in the Mishnah he is right. We treat him like a shemechinam. Right? It's a minimal amount, but the minimal amount of a shemechinam requires him to give it a shmir mu'ula, and therefore, if he doesn't do a shmir mu'ula as his responsibility, according to Rameya, as a shemechinam, so then he is chayv, because all he do is a shmir pchusa. Miuba nafkamina masur shemechinam v'nabafon of karaoi b'yatzav ezik pater hashomer the kolso shmira shemechinam v'abaylim mishalmim. At that point already, the Bailam would take out. So he's saying the nafkamina actually is not like we just said. What he's saying is that the shomer himself would be pata if he does the minimal amount. The Bailam steps in to, he's the one with the chiyuv of the shmir mu'ulav. Masr l'shomer sacha, the boy l'shomer shmir mu'ulav. But let's say the owner gives over the shar to a shomer sacher, or shomer sacher, his bar is higher than a shomer chinam. Right, the Baal Shem Shmi Mu'ula, because he's being paid. V'nobafan of Yatzav Hizik Hashomer is chayiv. The shomer in that case would be chayiv. V'gasim de Remeya Masa Shomuad l'Shemechinam. We'll see this in the Gemara in a minute. U'kamoy shefash, like I'm going to explain. So back in the Gemara. So Masa Shemechinam. Okay, so just start again from the beginning of the Gemara. Amra Blas de Remeya Shmius Nezaken Kashmir Shemechina. That shmiras nezakin is like a din of a shmir shemechin, like we just saw in the Marafulda, that he's it's we assume the minimal amount, right, and past that already, then the shemechin will be pata, and the Baal would step into the shoes of the shemer. And the Riyudin shmir nezakin is no k'shemesach, because he requires a more advanced, by default, a more advanced level of shmira. Amr Abelazar, Divre man his where we start again like the Yerushalmi, we have to start splicing and changing Gisos over here. So we're going to Marafulda. So Amr Abelazar, Divre Meye Masa Shar Muad L'Shemechinam. If I gave over Shar Muad L'Shemechinam Yatza Vehizik Potter. So if Yatzav Hizik, he's Potter. The Shomer is Potter. Yatzav Nitraf, if it turns out that the Shor itself was damaged, again, Potter. He's Potter. The Shomer doesn't have to pay for the damage caused to the Shor. And I'm talking about in both cases, he is a Mu'at. So in the first case, we said Yatzav Hizik is Potter, the Shomer is Potter. Because he did, like we said, he did the minimal requirement as a Shem Chinam. From then on, the higher level, that's the responsibility of the owner. In the case of Yatzav and Nitraf is Pata, That's because the Shah, being that he was a Muad, why would the Shom ever think that anybody, any other Shah would attack this Shah? They would think every Shah would be terrified of this menace to society Shah. So the fact that it was damaged, that's considered an unusual event, and the Shah Mechin is Pata. L'shoy if he gives over to a shoy mesacha, yotzav hizik, chayiv. So in that case, yotzav is if the shoy goes out and causes damage, chayiv, because like we said, the shoy mesacha has the owner's default higher level of shmira in terms of responsibility, therefore he's chayiv. Yotzav and nitrav pata for the same reason, because who would think that this shor muad is going to get injured by another shor? Amr Abelazar, Amr Abelazar, Divrei Yudin Masa Shor. Tam. L'shoym echinam. According to Rabbi Yehuda, if he gave over a short time to l'shoym echinam, yatsa vehizik. If it goes out and causes damage, according to Rabbi Yehuda, chayev. Why? Because like we said, I'll just read it out of my folder. Yatzav is a chayzik to my folder. Shahoylo l'shamre shmir ma'ula k'shem asacher. That was his response. But like we said, a tam by default, remember, Rabbi Yehuda holds, you have to give it a shmir ma'ula. The shmir sazach shkibel al vashoy mechinam hainu dafka shmir ma'ula k'shem asacher Rabbi Yehuda, because that's the default shmira for a tam is a shmir ma'ula according to Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore the Shem Mechinam accepted responsibility. He meant a high level of shmira. And therefore, and therefore, so therefore again, so Maser Shor Tam l'Shem Echinam Yatzer Zekhayev, like we said, and Yatzer V'Nitra Pata, Yatzer V'Nitra is Pata, because his even though we're talking about a Tam. However, his level in terms of damage being caused to the shore is level of a shor mechinam, and if it's a shor mechinam, that's not part of his responsibility. It's considered in it's a very unordinary event for the shor to get injured, and therefore he's part. However, if he gives over the shor tam l'shor misach yatzav hizik again chayv, like we said, because that's the basic responsibility is as a shor tam he has to give the shmir mula. Nitraf, Yotzav Nitraf Chayiv. However, over here, the Shem Esacha, there's a difference between Shem Esacha and the Shem Echin. The Shem Esacha is Chayiv. Let's just see the folder. Yotzav Nitraf Chayiv. Shavshay Nitraf Peklav Shmiras Nezakov, like we said, it's not part of his responsibility to Shemrit. Mikol Malkum Shem Esacha, Hayloi Gamkin, L'Shemush, L'Yuzit, L'Shayach, L'Yasik Daiti Betam. Right? So he has a higher level of responsibility than the Shomer Chinam, and therefore, even though Nechanami it's not an ordinary event, but since he's a Shomer Soche, it rises to the level that he is Chayiv. Okay, the next little shtickler, there's a bunch of different ways of learning it. So we'll learn it with, I think it's the Pnei Moshe that says it's going back. This next line we'll know the Pnei Moshe, and then the following line we'll go through Reb Chaim that I heard in the Shir. So Amr Belaza, so he's going back. Like the Pnei Moshe, B'aloi Shamahu V'Atorich Yaftoi. Right, so he's going back on the Mishnah. So Rabbi Elazar said, "Ein l'shmira elasakin, you got to kill it." Right, so, V'aloi Shamahu. At the end of the day, it's shama. In other words, I could create some kind of shmira. Right, I could erect a high fence all around that, and it's shama. But still, after. For some reason, I'm still mechuyev. Why am I mechuyev by a muad? The answer must be because there's no such thing as being shomer or shara muad. Instead, the only thing you have to do is kill it. Amr Ablaza, and here he expands. This is Rabbi Laza expanding his shita. Kol shmir shamar Torah is it's a sliding scale. Afilu akifa chametz basel ein misharon oisel begufa. In other words, we can erect a huge fence around it. You can rent an iron curtain all around the shar, but the end of the day, em mishanos begufa. We look at the goof of the show. We look at the show. What kind of show is the ficha teferoin? I say, imroy shmira. He's not such a wild axe. He's a tam. Then fine, pata. If you wrecked it, you put an iron curtain around it, and somehow it got out and it caused damage. You're pata, because at the end of the day, he's a more tame shah. V'im lav, however, if he's a muad, then there's no such thing as shmira, and therefore chayiv, and therefore he would be chayiv because there's no shmir. We see this guy as a wild shard. The only shmir to do is get to kill it. This is an expansion of Rebbe Loz's shita in the Mishnah. Hadran lach perik shosh nogach dal v'hei. Hadran lach perik shosh nogach dal v'hei. Hadran lach perik shosh nogach dal v'hei. Mazel tov. Okay, we'll just start the Mishnah here. Sagt der Mishnah fangt on. The fifth perek, Shoshanach is a part of an imtu over betzida. Ve'eni du a matchloi noch a yolda, or mishnach a yolda. So you have a case of Shogor as a para, and it turns out there's a dead fetus at its side. Now we don't know if it gave birth before, and it was the fetus was born dead, or died maybe after birth, nothing to do with the negicha, or maybe it died because of the negicha. So misham chatzinezek lepara, so you pay chatzinezek like the din of a tam lepara, or a via, which is since it's we'll see it's a mamanot of a safek cholkin, so half of a half is a quarter levlat, because that's in doubt. V'chein parush nochas hashah, the other way around. V'nimtza v'lad b'tzida, ben yiduim achaloi nocha yolda, mish nocha yolda. Right? Misham chatzinezek min apara, or avim min avlad. And Gemara is going to say, what does that mean, min avlad? Min apara, what is that? We'll discuss that mitzvah Hashem in the next get together. Call to everyone.